It is a privilege for me to introduce this year's commencement speaker, Senator Evan Bayh. Senator Bayh is from Terre Haute, Indiana, where he grew up and attended Indiana University. He was graduated with honors in business and economics in 1978. He earned his law degree from the University of Virginia in 1981, and after practicing law for several years, he entered politics. In 1986, he was elected Indiana's Secretary of State and then served 2 terms as governor of Indiana, the second time earning the highest percentage of votes in modern Indiana history. Evan Bayh was then elected to the Senate in 1998, winning the seat once held by his father, Birch Bayh. I told him while we were waiting in line to begin the processional that I had read his book, From Father to Son, A Private Life in the Public Eye, with great interest. And in reading that book, several of the senator's achievements stand out. It is clear in a very personal way that when twins were born in 1995 to Susan and him, the twins had a major impact on his life, caused him to deepen his interest in one of the most profound challenges confronting our nation, the transformation of family life. In his book, he points out that children not in contact with a father are 5 times more likely to live in poverty and 10 times more likely to live in extreme poverty. Senator Bayh has worked as governor first and then as senator to strengthen the family. I can also tell you that as a college president of an institution in Indiana, as governor, Evan Bayh worked to help Hoosiers attend college. Perhaps, as he has said in his book, his proudest single achievement as governor was initiating the 21st Century Scholars Program in 1990, which guarantees college for all children of modest means who live in Indiana and are willing to sign a pledge of good citizenship in middle school and then graduate with good grades. But what I really liked about reading his book was this, and of course, most of us, and you would not be surprised, all of us have opinions of what does go on in Washington, D.C. And most of us would grant that what goes on in Washington, D.C. is not the reflection of the world that we live in. There was one section of the book I particularly liked, because it's true that your twins spend so much time in Washington, but Senator Bayh has made every effort to give them a sense of their Indiana roots. And I liked it when you asked your son where his favorite vacation spot was, and he replied, going home to Indiana. Senator, it's a privilege to have you back home in Indiana this day.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your warm welcome. Dr. Bottoms, thank you for that very, very gracious introduction. You know, I really made me feel good to hear you go on and on like that, saying all those positive things, but I'm always still a little surprised when I'm introduced pretty much the way I wrote it, so I'm grateful to you. Grateful to you for sticking to the script today, and I've learned to not take kind introductions like the President's for granted. As he mentioned, I was privileged to be elected twice as the Chief Executive of our state. The first when I was 32 years old, and my wife Susan was only 28 and a half years old, and many people thought I used my high school yearbook picture as my campaign poster. We looked younger than we in fact were, and one of our first obligations, Doctor, was to have a big reception at the governor's residence for a very prominent group of individuals from around the country who'd come to Indiana for a gathering. And we put on an elaborate dinner party for them, and Susan and I stood on the landing greeting the dignitaries as they came in, and along came the group from Tennessee, and I extended my hand in greeting to them, and I said, good evening, sir, welcome to the governor's residence. Well, this individual paused for a moment, and he kind of looked me up one side and down the other, and he proceeded to put his coat over my arm. And he said, thank you very much, young man, I'll pick this up when I leave. So What else could I say but yes, sir, we'll take good care of it. And I'm grateful to you, Doctor. There'll be no cases of mistaken identity today. I love occasions like this. They are inspirational, they are uplifting. There's a touch of melancholy when I think about the passage of time and I look at these youthful faces and I ask myself, can it really have been 28 years since I was sitting where you're sitting today? And I think about my own 2 young children and I ask myself, it's going to seem like tomorrow when they're sitting where you're sitting today. Ceremonies like this are really in many ways a metaphor for life and a reminder to all of us to not take that life for granted, but to hold it tight and to cherish each and every moment and those that we love. I've learned a fair amount of humility from occasions like this. It was 10 years ago already, I was asked to give the commencement address to Indiana University, my alma mater. And I spent a lot of time working on that speech because I wanted it to be memorable. I wanted people to take something away from it that they might think about during the course of their lives every so often and think, what he had to say rings true to what I've experienced in my life. So I really put in some time, and the commencement day arrived and we gathered in the university football stadium. There was a big crowd there and a number of speakers and things before me, and unfortunately the day was overcast, not nearly as lovely as today, and the storm clouds began to gather and the wind began to blow and there were flashes of lightning in the distance. And finally, after I'd said a few jokes and talked for about 4 or 5 minutes only, at the beginning of my remarks, the heavens opened up and the rain began coming down, and I turned to Miles Brand, the president of IU at that time. I told the audience and I said, well, for safety's sake, I think we better adjourn these proceedings, but for those of you who are really interested, you can call my office and get a transcript of the rest of what I intended to say. Well, you know what? I had more people tell me after that speech that that was the best speech I ever gave. It was short, concise, to the point, so I am well aware that brevity is part of my mission here today, and I don't intend to forget that lesson, so I will get on with it. Let me thank Dr. Yu and all those at DePauw. Those of you who are graduating today are graduating from a great institution of higher learning. One of the greatest not only in the state of Indiana, but one of the greatest in the United States of America. You are fortunate in that fact. And I'm confident that your time here at DePauw has prepared you to do not only well in the years that lie ahead, in a world that is demanding a higher level of knowledge and intelligence to prosper economically, but also to do some good with your life and to understand that your own well-being is going to be defined by a whole lot more than just your narrow self-interest. This is the kind of institution that I'm confident has instilled that in you. I wish we could instill that sense in more Americans today. I too would like to recognize the parents here. This is a joyous occasion for you, a time for celebration. For those of you who've been writing the tuition checks, maybe a time for some relief, but that's okay too. It's been worth every penny that you've invested in these young people. And to the graduates, I would say, I think you'll find in the course of your life that it really is a team sport, that you won't accomplish anything that is truly worthwhile only by yourselves. But it will be those who lift you up when the going gets tough and sustain you through those difficult periods. It will be those who will exalt with you in times of triumph and success that will make it all worthwhile, all worth remembering, that will make it all possible. You've been blessed by those who have done that for you, and I would ask that when you too are parents one day, that you pass that sense of unconditional love and support on to those who you will be nurturing and raising one day, because we have too many kids across our state and country who are missing that. And it leads to problems with their own self-image and their own self-worth and their own self-esteem, and leads to difficulties in their lives. Our children deserve better from us than that. You've been blessed to have better than that, and I would encourage you to pass that on. I'd like to thank the faculty here today. Many of us have been blessed to be touched by great educators during the course of our lives. I know that I was. Individuals who inspired us and opened up the doors of learning, the joy of learning, the pursuit of knowledge, the quest for wisdom. I've often thought that while those in my chosen line of work, we may write the laws, those of you who are educators, you're custodians of our future. And I think here at DePauw University, the future of our country is in good hands indeed. So I'd like to thank the faculty here today. And most importantly, I'd like to thank and recognize our graduates. This is your day. It is a time for celebration, and I want to congratulate you. You've worked hard and you've achieved much. But it's also an important transition for you. It's a watershed in your life. And so perhaps for just a few moments, it's appropriate to reflect not only on the joys and the celebration and all of that, but perhaps also on the challenges and the responsibilities that lie ahead, because I believe when you look back on your life someday, it will be how you met those challenges, how you fulfilled those responsibilities that will define your life and will help to define this country. So it is to that I would like to speak this day. I would like to speak to you about this great place that we call America. What makes it special? What makes it precious? What makes it great? And what together we must do in the context of our own time to keep it that way. I'd like to start by telling you a story of what happened to me after I was sitting in a chair a lot like you're sitting in today, and I went out into the world and I got my first job. I went to work as a law clerk for a judge. His name was James Nolan. He was a chief judge in the Southern District of Indiana, based over in Indianapolis. He was a wise and a good man. Twice every year, we would have something called the new citizenship ceremony. And for those of you who haven't had a chance to attend one of these things, I encourage it to you. It is one of the most uplifting and inspirational things I've ever had the privilege of attending. There'd be 50 to 75 folks who would have gathered. They'd be dressed up in their very best attire because it was a big day for them. They were about to become citizens of the United States of America. They didn't take that for granted. It was a big deal. They invited their family members and their loved ones. They invited their colleagues from work because they wanted them to be there for that special occasion. The moment would arrive and I'd ask all of them to stand. The judge would come in. We'd pass out a little American flag to each one of them to hold as they took the oath of office. As they took the oath of allegiance, rather, the oath of allegiance to our country. It's more important than the oath of office, I can tell you that. And as I watched them become Americans, it occurred to me that the oath of allegiance that you take to our country, the bonds that bind us as Americans, are different in some pretty profound ways from the bonds that exist in other countries. An oath of allegiance to America is not an oath to an ethnic group or a racial group or a religious group. It's not an oath of allegiance or a bond to any political party. It's not even really about, when you drill right down deep and you think real hard about it, an oath of allegiance to a geographic area. What makes America special, the oath of allegiance to our country, is really the oath of allegiance to an idea, to a dream, to a promise that for more than 200 years has said to everyone in this country who was willing to work hard and dream big and sacrifice to make those dreams come true, that you can make it. You can have a life that's filled with more opportunity, more hope, more freedom, more justice. That's what makes the United States of America the special place that it is. Our country is about our differences, to be sure, but most of them are cosmetic. We're a rich mosaic. But what really matters is that when the going gets tough, we got a lot more in common than we do that divides us. There's a common ground on which we gather to defend this country, to make it better. Our differences, are the things that we have in common far outweigh our differences. That's what makes America special. What makes America special for more than 10 generations is that each generation has been willing to meet the challenges of its time, the sacrifices, the tough decisions, the hard going. That's what happened in Concord. That's what happened at Gettysburg. That's what happened on the cliffs of Normandy. That's what's always happened to make America great. And now it's our time to give that idea and that promise a renewed sense of vitality and reality in the context of our own times. Greatness does not happen by accident. It is earned, it is made, it is created by those who have the strength to make it happen. And so must we. We find ourselves surrounded by challenges that are going to test our mettle and determine whether we are worthy successors to the American promise. The globalization of the world economy competing with 1 billion Chinese and 1 billion Indians and a world of rapid change and increasing innovation, and what it must take to create prosperity here in our country today, to give all of our citizens what it takes to participate in renewed prosperity and hope. That will test our mettle. We face a changing demography with the aging of our population and what that's going to mean to Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and our budget, with debts and deficits that are too great for us to sustain. And we've got to strike the right balance between meeting our obligations to those who've come before, doing right by them, but also doing right by all of you, and not just asking you to pay the freight and to pay our bills. That's not what America is all about. We face energy challenges and healthcare challenges. We face the changing structure of the American family with more two-income families and more single-parent families, and not enough time in the day, and a culture that all too often is somewhat hostile to the objective of raising healthy, well-adjusted children who share our values with a sense of virtue about more than just being successful, but also living in a country that is decent too. We face the challenge of revitalizing our democracy. You know, in the last presidential election, one of the most hotly contested in the history of our country, 40% of the American people were so disconnected from our democracy, they didn't even take the most basic act of citizenship, going to the polls to vote. You know, in midterm elections, the figure's about 60%. That's not going to be good enough. We've got to reach out to them and re-enlist them in the cause of shaping their own destiny, because it's going to take all of us, each and every one of us, to fulfill the potential of America. That's something we've got to focus on, all of these things. Now, this is a longer conversation than we have time for today, but I'd like to mention 2 things I think we need to do to begin this journey of renewing American greatness. The first is, we've got to find more unity in this country and less division. We're too deeply divided. We're much too polarized. There's too much animosity in our country today toward one another. We cannot be a country of black and white, of rich and poor, of rural and urban, divided along religious lines and ethnic lines and lines of class. That is not America. That is not the path of greatness. We have to reconcile our differences and build bridges across the divide. Too often that's not the way it is in the city that I will go back to tomorrow night. We have to rediscover the truth of the old civil rights saying. It's one that I love. We may have arrived on these shores in different ships, but we're all in the same boat now. America is at its best and at its strongest, not when we are divided, but when we are one people with a common heritage and a common destiny. This country has always been a crucible in which we take our differences and instead find common ground. It is all too easy when you're in a position of power to think that you know everything, to rule with the whip hand, to not have a sense of respect for those who may have differing opinions. But that also is not America. One of the great lessons about this happened here in our very state in 1968, another time of turmoil in our country. Then, too, there was an unpopular war that had divided the country. Then, too, there were divisions along lines of race and class. There was a generation gap. There was disturbances on many of our college campuses. Martin Luther King was assassinated that year. In every major urban area across this country on that day, violence erupted, except in Indianapolis. Many people credit that fact to the presence of Robert Kennedy, who was campaigning for president. He was scheduled to make an appearance in the inner city, and he got the news of Dr. King's death on the way there. His advisors told him not to go, that it was too dangerous. But Kennedy said that he had to. He threw out his speech and he scribbled a few notes in the back of an envelope, and he got up on the back of a truck, a flatbed truck, and he looked out at the crowd, and this is something like what he said. He said, "I'm afraid I have some bad news for you. Dr. King was killed earlier today." And there was a gasp that went up from the audience and some cries of "No, no." And Kennedy said, "For those who are tempted to lash out in anger or in hatred, I can only say that I too had a loved one who was killed. He too was assassinated by a white man We must not travel down that road. We must not. What America needs today, he said, is not more anger or more division or more hatred. What America needs today is more compassion and more understanding and more love for one another. And then he quoted the Greek poet Aeschylus to the effect that suffering can lead to wisdom. And he asked the audience to say a prayer for one another and a prayer for this nation. That was true in 1968. It is true today in 2006. The second thing that I recommend to you as we look to the future and what it can be is a renewed sense of patriotism in this country. A deeper, more profound sense of patriotism than all too often we are summoned to. Of course, we must support the troops in time of conflict. That is absolutely essential. Of course, we salute the flag and say the Pledge of Allegiance. These are important and necessary things, but they will no longer suffice to make America all that it must be, to meet the challenges that will lie ahead in your future. Instead, the time has come once again to ask each of us to do something more, to begin to make some of the tough choices, and yes, some modest sacrifices, to overcome the obstacles that may be in our path, to build, once again, a more perfect union. We must ask one another, what temporary conveniences are we willing to forego in the course of our lives to meet the energy challenges that bind this country and will keep us from the future that we want unless we are prepared to make them? What are we willing to do to meet the generational challenges that we face so that the future will not be simply entitlements for us and obligations and debt for them? What must we do to support this country in time of military conflict? What of our ease, of our comfort, what of our abundance are we willing to give up to truly support those who bear the burden, who pay the sacrifice, who wear the uniform? I'm reminded of a visit I paid last year to Walter Reed Army Hospital in Washington. From time to time I go there. I think it's my responsibility to see those who've truly borne the burden. I went from room to room with some of my colleagues. It was an inspirational and moving experience. These are some of America's finest, in the prime of their life, 20, 21, 22 years old. So idealistic, so full of hope. For too many, they would lie there where the legs ought to be and there was an empty place, or where the arm used to be, there was nothing. Their parents and loved ones were with them, and they were trying to be upbeat and hopeful and optimistic and looking forward to getting well. But you could tell it was just hard. It was just hard. And I left the hospital that day, a day a lot like this, and the breeze touched my cheeks, and the sunshine hit my face. And I sat down on the curb. And then, too, I tried to hold the emotions back. And I thought to myself, what have I done? What can I possibly do to be worthy of them? To support them, to honor my country the way they have done. What can I do? And I will confess that for me and for I think too many of us, the answer so far is not nearly enough. And that is something that we must change if America is going to be all that it must be. And so in that spirit, I will leave you with one final story. It's the story of another university that I attended, as the doctor mentioned. It's the University of Virginia. We call it Mr. Jefferson's University. His home of Monticello is perched upon a mountaintop outside of town where you can look off through the valley and see the town of Charlottesville. And if you go back past the main house, back by the garden, down a little path, you find the family cemetery, where there's a very unostentatious, unpretentious headstone. And here's what it says. It says, "Here lies Thomas Jefferson, author of the Declaration of Independence, author of the laws granting the people of Virginia their religious freedom, founder of the University of Virginia. That's what it says. Well, legend has it that Mr. Jefferson showed these words to a friend of his before he passed and asked for his friend's opinion. And his friend looked at it and he said, well, Mr. Jefferson, he said, that's fine, but he said, surely this is not enough. Nowhere do you mention that not once but twice you were given the greatest honor that can be bestowed upon a citizen of this country, the presidency of the United States. Surely you must mention that. Nowhere do you mention that you were given the second highest honor, the vice presidency of the United States, or the fact that you were Secretary of State or ambassador to France during a critical period in our nation's history. Surely you must list these things. To which Jefferson replied, no, my friend, I would much prefer to be remembered for what I have been privileged to do for others, not for what others have so kindly done for me. A greater sense of unity in this country, a renewed spirit of patriotism, a devotion for doing to others, not just for ourselves. This is the genius of America. This will be the test of our generation. It is the challenge and the charge that I leave to you, the members of the class of 2006. And I ask God's blessing on each and every one. Thank you for having me today.